Hey everybody, welcome to the C23 Labs channel where we dive deep on everything involving learning tattooing and becoming better tattoo artists. I'm your host, Akermo, and today we're diving into one of my live stream seminars on creating sleeves and large concept tattoos that I hosted in my private tattoo artist community at C23 Labs. So yeah, today we're going to talk about sleeves and large concept design. It's a huge topic, and it is one that took me a very long time to even begin to sort of understand. And the truth is that there is no magic solution to creating a beautiful sleeve or a large concept. There is just a ton of creative problem solving. But I think that if you learn the right mindsets and sort of the right strategies for building a sleeve correctly, like from the beginning, it can become a lot easier and also a lot more fun. But I will say as a disclaimer that today we're going to go into very, very detailed topics and very sort of subtle ideas about designing sleeves. So yeah, there is no magic solution, but I'm looking forward to showing you guys how I think when I design sleeves. And I hope that's going to be helpful to you guys. So in this hour, we're going to try to cover, it's all about relationships. I wrote this because I really think it is all about relationships in any large tattoo or any tattoo that involves more than one element. And I'm going to get into what I mean with relationships a bit later. Number two, we're going to cover main objects or visual hierarchy. If some of you took my design course, you may have seen the video about visual hierarchy where I kind of go into this, but today we're going to go really deep. And then we're going to cover movement and flow. And then the last step is building a sleeve, like what to think about when you're building a sleeve. So we're going to take everything we learned today and we're going to try to sort of structure our strategy and mindset today. And then in the next sessions, maybe we'll try to actually build a sleeve. Today, I'm just going to talk about sleeves and I'm going to show you some of my work. And we're going to open a 3D model, hopefully, of an arm where I'm going to be demonstrating for you guys like some of my points that I'm going to cover today. But there won't be any proper designing today. Today, we're covering all the theory. So yeah. All right. Number one, relationships. When I say relationships, I mean relationships in size, in tone, like the darkness or the how light something is, and also a relationship in details. When I wrote this down, I realized that it can be like pretty confusing thinking about a relationship. But to me, it really is all about like the balance and the harmony of a sleeve. It's all about how the different elements, let's say, in the composition, like it's all about how they talk to each other and what their relationship to each other is like. And so the more objects you have, the trickier it becomes to create something that feels balanced and looks balanced. Relationships, it's a big topic. Probably this tattoo is one of the better examples of a tattoo with kind of like clear relationships. Actually, all of them has it, but we can start with this one. I think the most important thing is relationships. And what I mean is the relationship between this thing, and the other things here. If you notice, this piece is the biggest out of all of these pieces. It is on the top, but it's also the biggest. This, therefore, feels kind of like the top piece or like the main piece. Either you're going to look at this first or you're looking at this first. Why is that? I would say it is because of one, placement. Number two, size. Okay, these are our main objects in this tattoo here. And their relationship to all the other elements is that these are the two biggest ones. And they're also placed like in the center, more or less. This one especially, it's like totally in the center here. I sort of want this piece to be sharing the sort of focal point with this piece. And so the relationship between these two is very important. I very carefully sized this one and I very carefully sized this one. And so when I was designing it, I was moving this around and I was resizing it next to this one so that they would feel kind of balanced together. And I don't have an answer for what is balanced, but I know it when I see it. And I think you can develop a sense for like what feels balanced and what kind of looks good. But the important thing is that these two in the composition is the two like the larger pieces. And everything else, like the sides here, this, and even the text and the really small elements, they all have to be sort of balanced in relation to these guys. If this was like as big as this, then we would get something I call competition. Like it would start to compete. We wouldn't know what to look at. Like when there's a clear hierarchy, then it's easier for our brains to sort of know what to look at first. Clearly, these are the most important parts because they're the biggest, they are in the center, so our eyes are immediately drawn to it. That means that everything else in this sleeve has to work in relation to these guys. And we'll get more into sort of like sizing and all that a little bit later. But I just wanted to describe relationships to you. Like every piece in a large composition like this has to have a relationship to each other. And this is just about the size and the placement. But relationship can be darkness or lightness. Like, let's see a good example here. Yes, here, for example. This is what I want you to focus at when I did this tattoo. Why? It's in the center. It's right there on the arm. And it's also kind of like the darkest, most detailed element around here. Maybe the wings are kind of competing for the attention, but this is so centered and so circular that this is like the focal point. The first thing you look at is right here. That means that the stuff around it, like the wings and these little characters right here, they're like soldiers, they have to be smaller and also a little bit lighter in relation to this. So when you think about relationships, it can be anything. It can be a relationship in size, darkness or lightness, or even sharpness and softness, like in detail. But yeah, that's really relationships. It's the same here. If we compare these two, which two elements of these arms are the main objects, do you think? It's this and it's this. Why? Because they are bigger than the rest of the elements. They also kind of have the most detail. I would say maybe this has a bit more like things going on, but they are definitely like the centerpieces. And they're both biggest and they're placed on, let's say, the center of the forearms. This is like the most focal point of the arm. When we look, we kind of tend to look here. Then that means that the rest in relation to that has to work. So this here can't be bigger, a lot darker, a lot more detailed than this, because then they would compete. It would feel imbalanced. It would, and most of the time you won't be able to sort of put a finger on exactly what it is, but you'll just see a tattoo and it doesn't feel balanced or something feels off. There's no flow or like beauty to it. And most of the time it's because the designer didn't think about relationships and layout in this way. So it's very easy once you start to look at it, like these are the biggest, most central points and everything else is just a bit smaller and maybe a bit lighter or a bit less detailed, but nothing competes with these two, okay? So that's number one. I want you to try hold on to this idea of relationships and we're gonna come back to it later. Now, let's go here, back to our little presentation. Okay, telling a story. This goes into relationships as well. We want our compositions, let's say a sleeve or a back piece or anything, we want that to sort of tell a story. And when I say tell a story, it doesn't have to be like a Disney story with, oh, this means that, and then he did this and they did that, okay? More like, it doesn't have to be a very clear story, but a story can be actually just when they are like several elements are kind of beautiful together. Maybe telling a story is actually just presenting things next to each other. And when the viewer looks at it, they will see something because their brain is starting to work and they will kind of try to find a story in it. But telling a story for us can be more like visual storytelling. And I think that when you get relationships right, like the sizes and the placements right, and it sort of starts to tell a story because there's like a balance and they seem like the elements in the composition seems more sort of aligned with each other and they feel like they were very carefully placed and sized. So, and then it kind of starts to at least suggest a story. And so actually, instead of saying telling a story, I would rather say suggest a story. I'm going to go back to my iPad now. We're going to keep going back and forth this presentation on my iPad, but we're going to do this entirely. I'm going to look at some tattoos again. Okay. Do you guys see? Yeah. All right. So telling a story. I think that a piece can start to tell or suggest when just two objects, like in this one, when they are just either looking at each other. Let's say this bird and that bird their faces are facing each other somehow. It looks like they are communicating with each other. That suggests a story. There's like interplay between the elements. It's not just a bunch of images that you put on and they don't do anything together. It looks like maybe it would feel more like a fridge that you put all these magnet stickers on. There's no organization. There's no like interplay between the elements. But when there is interplay, like some kind of organization, it feels like it tells a story. And so, for example, in this tattoo, I don't know if you thought about it, but these two birds, they're kind of like flying around this eye. And if you remember the relationships thing, this eye is the focal point. Why? It sits in the center and it is the largest and probably also the most detailed section of this tattoo. And it's mostly because it's right in the dead center. And then I think there's something about eyes that just like drag us in. Like I look at eyes firsthand. Like the first thing I do, I look at the eye. But then these two birds in relationship to the eye, they're sort of flying around it. And I spent a lot of time like carefully placing the birds, sizing the birds to a point where it felt sort of balanced and it felt like they were kind of interacting with the eye or like that they were flying around the eye. And I think I kind of captured something where they do feel like they're sort of working with each other somehow. These two birds, they're flying around the eye, and it sort of starts to suggest a story. Now, obviously, I'm not like telling a story, like a beginning, middle, and the end here. But when I say story, think about like interaction. Like the other elements are doing something with the other elements. Like these birds are flying around this eye, and the eye is the center point. So that to me, it suggests a story. Excuse me. So that to me kind of suggests a story. Same here. I mean, these two side gargoyles here, they are facing each other, and they're sort of sitting around this circle here. So they're like sort of, protecting this circle, or just like they're stationed on either side of the circle. And that it feels like they're, I don't know, like guarding this circle here. I mean, if all this kind of sounds crazy to you, then I'm like, oh, it feels like they're guarding it or whatever. I really just look for interaction so that it feels like every element is kind of doing something with the other element, okay? And it's not always true that they have to do that, but it's a great little tool to think about. Like if you have, let's say, like two characters like this, they could be, and they are placed like separately from each other. In order for this to tell more of a story than it already did, maybe I would have chosen characters that kind of like look up at each other. So I would like try to place them and size them in a way so that it looks like she is looking up at him and he's looking back. Even if that's something that, you don't think about when you see it, it really, really, really helps to create that balance and the beauty and tell a little bit of a story. It's like they're doing something. So this is something I really think is important. It's not just about taking two images, putting it together. You'll get a fridge of stickers. They have to do something together. They have to tell a story. Same here, just a last example. This lion reference, originally, the statue that I used for this, he had his paw on like a globe in the original. So we didn't want that globe. We just wanted to use like the lion and not the globe. So I had to figure out something that the lion would have its paw on. Because if I were to take this away, this paw, let's just quickly do it like that. Let's say there was nothing here. Then it would just look like the lion had, like it's holding out its paw into the air. And then you get that sort of fridge sticker feeling. It's like the element just feels like you pasted it there. It doesn't feel like it belongs. So I had to figure out a way for the lion to like hold his paw on something. And that was this little symbol. And so to me, that kind of like, now we're like connecting the elements in a creative way, and you get interaction. You get to, like, it tells more of a story. Everything feels more connected. And so this is something really, really important to think about whenever you are, choosing reference images for a sleeve, or when you're placing them together, when you're starting to build the composition. Think about interaction and telling a story and all that. And then remember too that it's not a black and white rule. Here you can see that these are not like perfectly interacting and everything, but at least I'm thinking of like the size, and this one is flying this way, this guy's looking that way. It's sort of, if I were to switch to face this way, maybe it would have felt different. It would have sort of like looked a bit different. It's all about kind of testing and learning to look at these things from like a storyteller perspective and seeing what feels right. So you can imagine when I design, I sit for a long time and I move objects a millimeter that way, and then I'll make it a little bigger, but then I'll make it smaller, and I'll just keep adjusting things until I like hit that point where like, oh, the relationship between this and this looks so good right now on the arm. There's just something about this one pointing that way, there, the size, the placement that just feels good in relationship to each other. And so this is like an intuition that you're going to have to like build up over time, and it takes time. Okay, so that's like telling a story. Oh, let's see if Rick, you don't have any audio? That's too bad. Wait, can everybody else hear me? I'm just going to write. Okay, great. Okay, great. So moving on, we will go back to our little presentation. Now, main objects and visual hierarchy. Now you're going to see that all of these topics that I'm talking about are really connected to each other. Everything is really just like one big picture. And I've tried to break down these things into these smaller topics like interaction, storytelling. And now we're going to go into main objects and visual hierarchy. I already talked about it a little bit. It's about focal points and choosing focal points in your composition. And also we will go in a little bit to how to build a hierarchy based on sizes and so on. And then we'll talk a bit more about objects in competition that I already mentioned. Okay, so focal points. I'm going to jump back into my iPad. Let's see, my iPad is not feeling so good right now. There we go. Focal points. Actually, we can start here. What is a focal point? Well, the easiest example is, notice on all the forearm tattoos that I have here, this one, and that one, they have something in common. They have something about the placements in common. The focal points here is this, and this. Where do they sit on the arm? They all sit here. on what I call the center of each arm. They all sit there, and they are also either like circular or they have no shape like this one, like it's just that. But the important thing is that they all sit on the center, and that's because I decided that I think that this part of an arm, if you have a whole arm like this here, this section is like the focal point of an arm. Whenever somebody shows you a tattoo, you really like this upper part of the forearm is the most visible part of the arm. Even when they're just hanging relaxed with the arm, like straight down, it'll show, you know. I don't know if I could show you here in the camera, but like this star here that I have, let's see, this star is in a very focal point. It sits right there in the center. So when I'm relaxed, you can kind of see that too, right? And it sort of becomes the most visible part of the arm. And so that's what we want to build our compositions from. Like we want to put the most important image there, like the focal point, essentially. And if you look at a lot of my tattoos, you'll notice that they all follow the same structure. And I always work from the focal point, like our most important piece. And back to relationships, the main piece is always like the biggest, either the biggest, the darkest, or the most detailed. And they sit on the focal point. So this is the center of our story. This is like the most important object. Everything else around it has to work in relationship to it. And so there are a few focal points on an arm. I would say that if we are looking at just an arm, we have a couple of focal points. And the beauty of this is that we can sort of a bit like decide where we have our focal points, but there are two main focal points on an arm. And the first one is here, okay? Like the like upper half of an arm sits right here, mainly because it's like the thickest part of our arm and it's like sort of on the top. It just feels like that's where you would put the crown piece or like the most important part of your whole sleeve, like the biggest thing. You wouldn't put like just background there, right? So that's a focal point. And then the second most important focal point is here, like we discussed. That's how I see it anyway. Whenever I design a sleeve, I say this is the focal point and then this is the focal point. Here, I'll have all my main objects, the biggest ones, the darkest ones, the most detailed ones, okay? And the rest of the objects in an arm should really just like, hold on, I'm just gonna redraw this. The rest of the objects in the arm should play with these. They should somehow, you know, if there's like something here, you can like face that. Or, you know, if there's a bird, I'm gonna draw a super quick, super ugly bird or a fly, they can sort of like fly around the center point. They should all sort of like work with this center, the focal point. They should probably not be bigger. They should probably not be darker or like the darker thing. They should probably not be as detailed as the center point. They should really just be supporting elements. And so in a hierarchy, we want, let's see, I can draw out here. I'm going to draw this on the arm, okay? A hierarchy of elements is basically the ranking of different elements. Our most important elements are our focal points, right? Those are going to be the biggest and the largest. So they are like top hierarchy, right? Like top of rank. And then I'm going to do focal points, okay? And then our second most important elements in a composition, they are our supporting elements. That would be everything that's around the main element, like smaller birds or, you know, line work even around, you know, when you do a line background. That's like a supporting element. It kind of just is there to support this, right? So those we call supporting elements. And again, they shouldn't be bigger. They shouldn't be darker, more detailed. They shouldn't compete with the main pieces, the focal points. They should not like compete for the attention. They should only support, like work around it. And that's where the storytelling comes in. Like you can place these things, you can pick the images and ideas to look interesting next to or around your focal points. And then number 3 and 4 is really just like further, even more supporting elements. Maybe those supporting elements become even smaller. Like that would be little texts here and there, like a little symbol, you know, connecting things together. Those are our like third most important elements. And if you notice, those are usually the really small elements. If we go back to our tattoo here, I would say, oh, okay, these are main elements. And then we can choose supporting elements. That would be this, and that, and maybe that, okay? It's kind of far away from our centerpiece, so, but it's still a supporting element. And then we have the third tier of supporting elements, and that would be all these little things, like the little dots and the symbols and the texts. I actually add those last, usually, when I design, because they come last. They're the least important. First, when we start to build compositions, we always start from the main objects. And when those look good, just on their own, like you've placed them, you've sized them, then you start to introduce the other supporting elements that are going to support this. And then when you're happy with those two, then you can start to think about, okay, can I connect with line work? Can I do some dots, some decorative stuff? But 80% of the composition is really going to be in making a nice balance and nice interaction, nice storytelling between the main elements, like our focal points, and the supporting elements. That is 80% of the work. It's just like placing those, choosing those, and sizing them. I hope that makes sense for everybody. I wonder if you guys have any questions, because I'm rambling on here, but I hope all this kind of makes sense. If you guys do have any questions, I'm very much ready for them. If not, we can just move on. All right, we only have an hour, so we have 20 more minutes. I'm gonna continue then. Right, let's see, what do we have next on the list? We have objects in competition. Okay, so the opposite of harmony and the opposite of like balance and good storytelling is when objects are in competition with each other. That means they're in like out of balance. Let's see if I can make a good example here. Okay, yeah, let's try this one. See what happens now if I do this. I'm gonna just select this one. And I wish maybe I could pull up the actual design from this. It would take a bit of time. I'll do it this way. Let's see. Elvin has a question. In the case, if you fill skin with ink, does this main and supportive element point still stays the same? Yes, I think so. Even in traditional sleeves, like an old Japanese traditional tattoo sleeve, for example, where you cover like all the skin, you still have to think about relationships. If you imagine a dragon and a koi fish on a Japanese sleeve like this, they're kind of like, one is pointing down to the one below, and then the other one is like that, you know. There's interaction, so there's storytelling. The sizes are very important. And actually, you know, the background that you put in, like, you know, the black waves, like the type of stuff that I have, but I have really bad tattoos. So that becomes, I guess, a supporting element. You could say that the background is there to bring out the main pieces, right? The background, the only function that the background has is to sort of, not just to fill skin for the sake of filling skin. It's there to help the main pieces. And that is the role of any supporting elements. It's all about creating balance. And I mean, the style of Japanese sleeves, for example, that's just, they're built so that you have this like darker or like gray background. And in terms of the contrast, it always works together with the main pieces. The background is really there to like push out and make the main pieces pop. Yes, Rick, the background helps guiding the eye and guiding, you know, the flow. It really is what gives that motion and flow. Very good point. Very, very good point. Okay, so back to the idea, and this applies for a Japanese sleeve too. A very, very easy way to create imbalance in this tattoo here would be to make this that big. What if we did it like this big on the leg? You just imagine if we had this tattoo in front of us right now. I could even clean it up a little bit. Let's see if I can like make it better. Imagine that this is like the tattoo that we have. Okay, I'm just gonna fix this a little bit. Okay, it's very, very bad drawing here, but oh, sorry guys, I forgot to share. Hold on, I'm gonna redo it. Lucky I didn't start going until you caught me. Thank you. Okay, so sorry. I'm gonna just go back here. There we are. Sharing is caring, dude. That's fucking hilarious, Dimitris. Okay, so let's look at this tattoo here. I mean, actually, before I go ahead, I will say, I think that the top piece here that I added, this one, it's kind of competing with this. I think that this piece is cool, but there is like some weird little imbalance between these two. I think this maybe is too big. It's like taking the attention away from this one, and this one is not sitting on a focal point necessarily. So I think I actually created a little bit of competition between these guys. So there's like an imbalance, but sometimes it works, okay? But we're gonna make it worse. Let's say I select this here. Now we're gonna create really bad competition here, like a lot of competition. We're gonna select this and we're gonna make it like this big. Now, yeah, trust me, I'm a terrible perfectionist. That's why honestly, my clients think I'm crazy when I like spend an hour just like sizing a one detail. But honestly, I mean, it's just how I work. Okay, so imagine that this piece here was this big. This feels imbalanced, right? It feels like off. I mean, maybe it would look good, but like it's not balanced. Something is weird about this design. Like, I don't know, should I look here? This is in the center, but this is like taking the whole show, you know? And you can't even see the whole thing. And sometimes it's cool if it wraps around the body, obviously. But my point here is that there's no balance. You can agree, right? Like, wouldn't you say that this is a bit big compared to all this? If we were to like bring any form of balance to this, all of this would have to also get a bit bigger so that yes, it feels more like a separate piece, right? There's no interplay. There's no like balance. They're not talking to each other. Great catch, because, you know, we can all see it when it's wrong. And I think we can all see it when it's right. But there's no like straightforward way to get to the place where it's right. But it's more about with time building up like some kind of sensitivity and intuition to, okay, this feels off. What's wrong? I think this piece, maybe it's a bit big in relationship to the other pieces here. Okay, let's see, we bring it down. What happens if we make it a bit smaller and work on the exact placement? Oh, now it feels like, okay, they belong into the same picture. There's something very subtle about the distance between these two and the space that we create in between. I often say this to my clients, like the beauty of a sleeve or a big piece, at least in the style that I do, is all about the skin that you leave in between the pieces. It's all about the negative space that, like, if I place this here and I place this here in this size, I look at, okay, what type of like empty space am I creating in between? Do I like it? Does it like create a beautiful pattern? Does it feel balanced? And so, as I said in the beginning of this live stream, I don't have a magic solution for you. If there was one, I'd tell you right away. And trust me, when I find out, I'll tell you. But it's all about this. It's about kind of like learning to use your eyes and trusting your gut and a lot of trial and error. I think that a lot of tattoo artists, when they're designing, they don't think about these things. And maybe we're too fast or too quick. Like, oh, putting things together. Okay, great. Stop, like slow down and be very, very particular. And if you start by structuring your compositions from the hierarchy that we talked about, like my main pieces, my supporting elements, my supporting elements, then it becomes a little bit easier as a framework to work in. And you spend time more on, okay, I'm going to place my two main objects here, and I want them to feel really good with each other and on the body part, just on their own. Okay, and when that feels good, okay, now you can slowly bring in a supporting element. Let's see what it does to the overall dynamic of the sleeve, right? So like, okay, what happens if I put those here? All right, what does that do with this one? Does it take it away from it? Does it make it cluttered? I need to create some kind of nice little empty space here to not take away attention from this one. All these small things, there's no shortcut. You just gotta sit with it and smoke a joint and fucking just look sometimes. And only smoke a joint if it's legal in your country. Obviously, I'm not promoting any drugs here, but yeah, that's really it. What else do we have? I would like to show you some other stuff. Let me see. Yeah, Rick, great question. Do you ever use higher contrast on the focal points and a narrower range for supporting elements? Yeah, you know what? That's an effect that I really, really like. Can I show you some examples of that? Let me think. I mean, in one way, let's say this. If you turn that question around, a main element should definitely have, unless it's a very interesting creative choice, but it should definitely have the full range of tones. And any supporting elements, yeah, you can choose to make it like gray, just to sort of like avoid competition. You kind of push it back a little bit into the background by making it like lighter than the rest. Then it won't take the attention. So yes, it like working with the tone of something, like narrowing the tonal range is a great tool for that. And I think it looks really aesthetically pleasing sometimes. Let's see if I have a example of that. Maybe not here. Well, I mean, here's a subtle one, okay? This circle and this piece here. Supporting element, main element. There's more black, pure black ink in this one, right? It's like fully saturated at parts. It has like all the pure blacks. But this one, yeah, it has like full black here. It has a little bit of black, like pure black, but then the rest is like pretty dark, but not full black. And yes, that I think definitely helps it to sort of give the main piece some more like space and breathing room. If this was like super dark, let's just like fucking draw it super dark right now. Super duper quick. Right, so it would be funny if this actually turns out to look really cool and everything I'm saying is like fucking bullshit, but let's see. Okay, why don't we make it like fucking super dark? Okay, yeah, what happened now? Now this is the darkest element of the whole composition. Now, don't you feel like your eyes kind of go here versus going here and here? Oh my God, I forgot to share again. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm kind of like new at my job here, clearly. Okay, let's redo this. So on Rick's question about narrower tonal range, I think that this element could be, if this was darker than this, then they would compete with each other. And so definitely like leaving the full darkness to your main elements is a good idea. It doesn't mean you can't make supporting elements like not dark, but this is probably the best example that I do have. This is a supporting element and this is main. Okay, this main object has like a lot of pure blacks. It has some pure skin. It has the full tonal range. It's like full, like it's pretty high contrast too. So it's like popping, it's same with this one. This has like a lot of detail, full tonal range. We have skin, we have pure blacks, and we have everything in between. But then you look at this one. This has some black, like it's dark here out by the edge, but then it's mostly like a darker gray and with a few black details. Okay, it's sort of like very finely balanced to like not compete with this one. So what I did here before I forgot to share my screen was I drew this all black. And just to see what happens if we were to just, actually let me open a new layer. I drew this all black and we'll see now what it does. Okay, just like that. It may not even have to be full black, but just like I'm making this like significantly darker. Okay, like if this was the one object in the whole composition that had like the most black or like the most contrast, it would totally throw it off balance. Like, what are you focusing on right now when you see this? Your eyes are most likely drawn here first, right? And I mean, we can take into account that like an iPad's black is much darker, so we could do that. That would sort of like now I feel like this one and this one and this one, they're all kind of competing for the same spot in the hierarchy. But yeah, if that's just a bit lighter, then it leaves room for these guys to shine. So long story long, Rick, yes, making supporting elements a little bit lighter sometimes, it can be a great tool to sort of make sure that they're not competing, for sure. Very good question, Amber Hendricks. How does the story and theme from the client tie in with the design that I created? Let's take a good example. Actually, this one is a great example. So I tend to ask my clients for a lot of creative freedom. And in my experience, most clients, they do want to tell a story, many of them. They care about the tattoo having meaning, especially when they do just like one tattoo, like what does this mean? Very often. I mean, you guys know that, right? But when we're doing sleeves and like bigger concepts and concepts that are like they involve many different objects, the people that come to me for a tattoo, they all ask like, how did you choose all these? Like, did the client choose it, or did you make these choices? Because they say, I look at your work and I'm like, how could they come up with this? Did the client come up with all of this? And then I say, no, I get to hear a client's story, and I'll take the client's story and I'll try to remix it and tell it in my way. So whenever I first consult with a client, I kind of try to tell them that like, okay, we're going to take your story, but you want it to look like this, right? And then I'll show the work, maybe my own work that they requested, like, oh, I love this sleeve. And I'll say, in order for me to be able to do this, like of this quality, I'm going to need to have a lot of creative freedom on how we tell your story and like with what elements exactly we use. And so in this case, for example, with this one's leg sleeve here, my client was very flexible. He wants to tell a story about his family members and things that are important to him in his life. And then from there, he's pretty free. He knew that he wanted to do something with his two sisters, and he knew that he wanted some different texts from poems that he likes a lot, and that some things about the places where he grew up, like where they had his summer house and da. Okay, so I started asking him questions about, okay, what are your sisters like? And he said, one is very observant. She's just like very quiet. She looks before she speaks. She thinks a lot before she speaks. She's really like a very careful person. And my other sister, she is very loud, and she goes headfirst in everything she does. She is really the wild one of all of us. Okay. And he had given me a leg sleeve that contained a lot of statues, a lot of angels, the stuff that I do. Okay. And I said to him, okay, so I would say, since you like the looks of this work, like with the statues and the Greek mythology, and you want to do something with your sisters, we should try to find some either like statue or like warrior statue that we could that sort of gives the feeling that you feel towards your sisters. Okay. So for the wild sister, we chose like this warrior, and then for the more quiet sister who's observing everything. He said that all the time. He's like, she's very observant. Okay. And so then I was like, what if we do just like a Greek statue with the eyes, no mouth, no nothing. She's just looking and observing. So that's when we came up with using this. And so Amber, I hope that helps your question, like how I try to sort of like compromise with a client and sort of tell their story with my images. And I find that it really helps when you invite the client in on this process. Like I told the client basically what I'm telling you right now, like this is how I interpret this. And I think this will sort of look good, but also talk about your story that you want to tell with this tattoo in a way. Like it's a nice middle ground where we're making something that looks amazing or looks great, that you're happy with, it's aesthetically pleasing, looks good on you, and it tells your story. Because sometimes clients come with, a very, very clear story. This is what I want. I want an octopus coming out of a flower. And, their ideas aren't always that good. And no, here we go. Am I still live? It just said that it ended. Okay, great. Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But it's really all about compromising with you. So I think realizing that, honestly, like people want to tell a story with their tattoos and everything, but deep down, the thing they care the most about is, guess what? Looking good. And if you can sort of tap into that and like get the client to feel that like, we're going to make you look fucking great. Goal here. And if you then say that and then say, I think your idea with the idea that can work, let's say an octopus coming out of a flower that drives a truck. Okay, that's the client's idea. I would say, I'm sure that's a great story. And I see where you're coming from with the story, but we also, like my job as a tattooer is to make sure that it also looks great on you and that it follows your body and it flows, and we got to make it aesthetically pleasing. And I think it'll be really hard to do that with the way you're describing these elements. And then you can sort of say, well, I can try to sort of make my version of this, of keeping your story, but also making something that is going to look really, really good. And then you can come up with suggestions. I made so many designs for clients that would, pitch in designs that they didn't like, they want to change, but it's worth trying. doing exactly what the client wants is not always the best thing, because sometimes the clients want shit, And then, but I'm not the one to tell you what is bad or good art, but I think that our roles as tattoo artists is also to sort of customize the client's idea to something that is meaningful to them, but that also looks great on them. So yeah, we sometimes have to educate our clients a little bit and tap into that deep down. The client wants to look good too. And so if you can sort of reach the client at that level and say, okay, I care about your tattoo, and it has to look great on you. Usually they are like, yeah, okay, I'm open to any changes. I just want it to look good, of course. So that's how I would build a story and sort of talk to the client in sort of customizing this concept to tell their story, but through my pictures. Yeah, yes, Amber. It is difficult. This is probably what I find the most difficult about our jobs. It's really working with the client. It's compromising, doing something that you're happy with, or trying to make something that you're happy with, and and making something that the client is obviously happy with. And in the end of the day, we do work for the client, but I think you can sort of, if you can make the client feel that you care as much about their tattoo as they do, then the client will feel safer and maybe even trust you a bit more, like your recommendations, so that it doesn't seem like you're trying to push a design that you want to do just because you want to do it, but that you genuinely feel that like, hey, this is the better choice. And then you can come up with rational answers to why that is and why their initial idea may not work as well as they thought. A lot of the times it helps showing them like, hey, here is your idea exactly like it is. And you'll get them to agree like, oh, that doesn't look so good. Yeah, that's maybe why we should probably change this and like make it look good. And then here we have a compromise, but yeah, making the client feel that you care, then it'll naturally help them feel a little bit more safe and they can trust you, or at least begin to trust you. I hope that helps. But we are working for clients in the end of the day. That's how it is. Rick, thank you so much. I try to be very communicative with my clients, and I think this is why we have Oshin here in the space, and hopefully we get some more interesting guests where we can talk about this topic on like how to talk with clients, and like, because it's one thing like learning to design a great big composition that looks great and is balanced, but we have to use our clients' ideas, and so there's a lot of work and a lot to talk about on that topic of like client communication on designing and so on. And it's easier for some people than others. But I'd love to, if you guys ever have any questions on that or anything else, just as always, feel free to write it in the Ask Anything space. And like the more questions we get from you guys, the better content we can do for you, because I'll see the questions that everybody asks and then I'll create something from that. So if you guys want us to talk more about this type of stuff, just let me know, and we will. We're doing the sleeve series here today because you asked for it. So yeah, that's really it. Let's see. We are at 1 hour. I think this is where we will wrap this session up. This is obviously recorded, so we're going to cut this up a little bit, take away all my mistakes where I forgot to share that, and post this so you can watch it again. Maybe next time we can design a little bit. And I would also like to talk about, there's one more aspect of designing a sleeve, and that is that you can't design a sleeve all in Procreate or like all on a 2D surface. Like part of what makes a really good sleeve good is when, one side of the tattoo like connects beautifully to the other side, and in order to be able to plan that, you have to either have a model or have the client there with you, or you use, a 3D model like we have here. That's why we have them in the community for you to download. But 3D models are good, but they won't solve all your problems, sadly. So next time I want to talk a little bit about things we can do to like plan a sleeve to sort of curve well and to have multiple sides. Like it's one thing to design on a flat surface. So, and it's something I see a lot in tattoo designs where tattoo artists don't fully take into account how a sleeve will curve with the body. Like they'll put a straight line here. They think it'll be straight, but when they put that stencil on, it'll start to curve upwards. Then it'll be shaped with the body. And I know that all of you guys have encountered this. I do too. And yeah, it's a case of a lot of creative problem solving and also knowing how to plan it in a way where it's most of the time going to kind of work as you thought it would. So I'd love to talk about that next time. That goes into stenciling and all that stuff too. So thank you, everybody. I enjoyed doing this, and I love that so many of you show up. Again, if you have any questions, just write us, and we'll try to make content based on that. So, and I love doing this type of stuff. Thank you all for coming so much. Take care, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed watching this seminar. If you're looking for more lessons and seminars like this, you can visit c23labs.io, where you can access things like our online communities, where you can get your tattoos critiqued by me and my team. You can also get guided roadmaps and seminars on learning tattoo designing, and how to manage and grow your social media and learn critical business skills as a tattoo artist. See you again in the next lesson.